Hello, I'm Adriana High, and for my mapping project, I chose to evaluate the effects of alternative and nuclear energy on aquatic life, specifically fish species in European countries. My evaluations were based off both nuclear and alternative energy. Some of those alternative energy sources include solar power, wind power, hydropower, and nuclear and geothermal power. I'm mentioning this because I know it's easy to consider only nuclear energy as being harmful to the environment, but my data is including those less thought of energy sources. So I did want to note that explicitly during the presentation. So if you guys recall from chapter 1 of the Stephen Hill's Europe's Promise, he discusses the magnitude of Europe's energy efficiency and conservation efforts. He also highlights some of the advantages to being energy efficient in the use of alternative energy. And he says that through specifically through Europe's efforts, they have led to new technologies and industries, which have in turn created tens and thousands of jobs. So that's just one of the advantages to sort of this alternative energy concepts. So with that, there are, several advantages, so obvious advantages from progressing away from the non-renewable resources like oil, fossil fuel, and coal. So there are advantages, and with everything there comes some disadvantages as well. So some of those advantages include the ability to be replenished, so the fact that they are renewable, little to no greenhouse and net carbon emissions, and those other economic benefits that Stephen Hill was discussing, so the creation of jobs and new jobs. However, there are certain aspects of alternative energy use that can negatively impact aquatic life, mostly from nuclear and hydropower. Wind and solar power pose no significant threat to fish or aquatic life that I could identify during my research. So some of those disadvantages include fish impingement by diverting natural surface water. Fish can be killed by turbine blades used to power hydroelectricity. Global warming emissions are produced during the construction of hydroelectric power plants. And water flowing through dams collect nitrogen, which can be harmful to fish populations. But the big controversial disadvantage comes from nuclear power plants that utilize a once-through cooling system. Its disruption of habitat happens during both the intake and discharge of water and those processes that are implemented. So the cooling systems that are installed with filters that are supposed to prevent large objects and fish from getting pulled into the cooling system. However, some small fish, some aquatic life is able to fit through, and others are trapped. They're killed during the intake process, and the others are trapped into the filters. So in addition to that, the water released back into the ocean is up to 25 degrees warmer than it was originally. So the warmer water kills some fish and forces other fish to search for cooler waters. The warm water also attracts non-native aquatic life, which they often die from cold shock when the cooling system is no longer in use. So this slide contains a quote from an article. Researchers conducted a study to determine how the Forsmark nuclear power plant in Sweden was affecting fish impingements. And essentially, they concluded that there are a lot of fish being impinged, and the story also, or the article also offered a potential solution to the issue. But these are fish that are impinged and clearly not a positive or a comfortable experience for them. So we can sort of start off by looking at the alternative energy map. So this is a map that I created based on my data. The lighter colors indicate a lower LQ, while the darker colors signify a higher IQ. You'll notice that one of the highest LQs belong to Iceland. So in fact, 100%, almost 100% of Iceland's electricity comes from alternative energy sources. The majority of that from hydropower, with another sizable amount from geothermal energy. Iceland is considered a pioneer in the use of geothermal energy. So Spain was amongst the lowest LQs for the alternative energy usage. So even though in 2013, wind accounted for over 20% of Spain's total energy use, and Spain has one of the largest solar industries in the world, more comprehensively, though it's still only a fraction of the total energy consumption in Spain. So I was initially surprised by my data, especially after finding this map of nuclear power plants in Europe. So you can see that in some of the countries like France, where there is a sort of saturated amount of nuclear power plants, and you compare that to France on my map, you would think that it'd have a darker color, signifying a higher LQ just because of that. But that just goes back to the fact that my data did include those other alternative sources, and that just because the power plants are there, it's not necessarily a big part of the energy that's actually being used through these countries. So this is the map that I created for the data for the fish species threatened. And just to give you guys some perspective, it's estimated that there are about 30,000 to 40,000 fish species in the world. There are about 900 species found in the Mediterranean. And in Poland, there are only 8 fish species that are threatened. So the moral of that little story is that there are just a lot of fish in the world, essentially. So the Czech Republic is amongst the lowest LQs for the fish species threatened. So in my research, I found that experts refer to the Czech Republic as the roof of Europe, and because of its location, there aren't many major rivers that flow into it, and it's also not adjacent to any ocean water. There is a big importance placed upon reservoirs in the Czech Republic, the most important being artificial lakes built in enclosed river valleys. So there are 150 of these in the Czech Republic. So the establishment of artificial bodies of water is a tradition that dates back to the Middle Ages in the Czech Republic, when there were a large number of fish ponds created. But since only about a quarter of those fish ponds remain. So as well as having a high LQ for alternative and nuclear energy use, Iceland also has a high LQ for the number of fish species threatened. And to me, this wasn't really surprising just because of its competitiveness in the seafood industry. And it's also a premier travel destination for those of us who really like to eat or catch fish. This is a side-by-side comparison of the two variables, and based on these maps, I don't find any significant correlation between alternative energy use and the fish species threatened. However, there are a few countries that did remain consistent through each variable. As we discussed, Iceland, was high in both categories, and as you can tell from the map, both Germany was also low in each category. Other than that, in a couple other countries, there wasn't a surprising relationship between the two. So obviously, there were a lot of variables that I did not consider. Some include the country's proximity to water, the prevalence of hunting fish for food and sport fishing, and fish's ability to quickly restore their population. So these are things that I did not account for. Had I did, I may have had different conclusions. But to conclude, Kanye pretty much, his shrug kind of depicts how I feel about the results. There wasn't really much to say. I didn't find that there was any substantial correlation between the two variables that I chose to research. So the following is just the links to the data that I found, including some of the articles. So there's that shrug. So thank you very much for your time.